Flashes of blue lit up my living room walls like some twisted dance club from a nightmare. I darted to the window and froze in place. 2 cop cars, an FBI van, and our HOA president standing out front, finger aimed squarely at our house like I was some kind of runaway criminal. My chest pounded as I called out to my wife, "What the hell did you do?" But when she caught sight of those flashing lights, she didn't look panicked, she looked pleased. Ever had a run-in with a power-tripping HOA president? Drop your experiences in the comments, because what happened to us next is something you wouldn't believe. It all began with a petty argument over the color of some roses, and ended up involving federal agencies and turning our calm suburban dream into a full-blown circus. We'd only been in Maple Grove for 2 months, and, honestly, I thought we'd landed in heaven. I'd set up a woodworking shop in the garage, and locals had already started placing small orders. Most of them seemed to care more about lining up herbs and flowers than they did about the craftsmanship. But hey, I wasn't complaining. Emily spent hours out back designing the garden, her laptop always open on the patio table. I'd see her tapping away with this intense look on her face, like she was cracking some top-secret code. I glanced at her screen a few times, saw phrases like compliance breach, regulatory enforcement, federal jurisdiction. When I asked what she was up to, she'd just smile and say she was replying to work emails. Some neighborhoods think they can just invent their own rules, she'd say with this odd little chuckle I never quite got. Me? I build furniture, simple stuff, strong, clean work with my hands that pays the bills and makes me happy. The neighborhood felt perfect. Tree-lined streets, lawns like magazine covers. The kind of place where kids ride bikes without parents hovering. I was even excited to have real neighbors after 3 years stuffed in a tiny apartment downtown. I mean, what could possibly go sideways in the suburbs? Emily poured herself into the backyard. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to that strange little laugh. Her job always sounded dull to me, some kind of community management from home that earned enough we didn't have to worry much about my shop. She never shared much about what she did, but I chalked that up to personality. Emily was always the type to keep work and life in separate lanes. She'd close her laptop the second I walked into a room, not suspiciously, just in a done with work kind of way. I respected that. Who wants to hear about spreadsheets over tacos anyway? What I didn't realize was what those spreadsheets actually involved. Then Friday came. That's when Patricia Wellington knocked on our door, holding a pile of papers and wearing a strained smile that made my skin crawl. She introduced herself as the community president and handed Emily what she called a special invitation to Tuesday's HOA meeting. Patricia looked exactly how you'd imagine a self-declared neighborhood queen. Immaculate blonde hair, designer outfit that probably cost more than our monthly groceries, and a voice that made every word sound like law. "I hope you understand how important it is to be involved," she said, eyeing Emily like she was assessing a potential threat. "We have standards that must be upheld." Standards for what? Breathing. Emily took the letter with the same face she makes when flipping through grocery ads. "Thanks," she said coolly. "I'll think about it." Patricia's smile twitched ever so slightly, and for a split second, something flickered in her eyes that made my gut tighten. "Think about it. This is a required obligation," she snapped. Emily stayed calm, which impressed me, honestly, because Patricia was already getting on my nerves. "I understand," Emily replied, unmoved. "Have a good day." Once Patricia left, Emily gave the letter a closer look. I watched her brows lift slightly as she skimmed the jargon about compliance, obligations, and required governance. It read more like cult paperwork than a neighborhood. Notice. Then Emily's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned, not with fear, more like irritation. "I've got to take this," she said. "There's an issue in a Colorado community. I overheard fragments that violates the fair housing rules. And you can't ban pets based on breed. That's a federal law." When she hung up, I asked who called. But she was already back to typing, her email signature reading, "Emily Williams, Community Compliance Division. Just work, hun. Community stuff," she said. I noticed her closing browser tabs labeled things like HUD statutes and federal standards, but I was more concerned with what we were having for dinner. I mean, how intense could community management really be? Then she shut her laptop, glanced at the HOA invite, and gave a smile I'd never seen before, a knowing smile. One that didn't reach her eyes, This little HOA doesn't have the reach to mess with me. There was something in her tone, something that made me wonder what she wasn't saying. Still, I brushed it off. How bad could neighbor drama really get? Spoiler: way worse than I ever thought possible. Tuesday rolled around, and Emily didn't show up at the HOA meeting, which made sense to me. We'd barely unpacked. She was in the garden, watering tomatoes, when Patricia called. "Mrs. Williams, this isn't optional," she barked, slicing through the air like a blade. "I'm busy," Emily replied without even glancing up. "Feel free to send an email. Who do you think you are?" "These are community rules." Patricia's voice trembled with rage. I saw something flash across Emily's face then, something dangerous behind her calm. She hung up, no reply. And, I swear, I felt the moment Patricia unknowingly signed her own downfall. That night, Emily sent an email. I caught a glimpse of her screen as she typed, and my jaw nearly hit the floor. Emily Williams, Senior Compliance Officer, Community Oversight Division, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. I stared at that signature for what felt like forever. When did my wife start working for the federal government? The very next morning, we got 2 violation notices slipped under our door like subpoenas. One said our roses weren't the right shade, needed to be changed to soft pastels. The other? Our garden storage box was placed 3 inches outside. Regulation. Total fines, $800. For flowers that were too pink and a box that was barely out of place. I could feel my blood pressure climbing. Apparently, in Patricia's universe, vibrant petals were an act of war. Emily scanned the notices, nodded, and started jotting down notes on a yellow legal pad, scribbles in shorthand that looked suspiciously like legal prep. "Creative interpretation of the rules," she said flatly, like she was analyzing evidence. I wanted to ask what she meant, but she was already in analysis mode, like she was building a case. It all felt surreal, like we'd stumbled into a dimension where HOA dictators ruled with rulers and color wheels. I got curious, so I dug into the HOA's bylaws online and stumbled on a goldmine. Compared to similar communities, Patricia's letters were hostile. Her wording came off like legal intimidation, designed to scare rather than inform. I showed Emily, and she studied the documents like someone who knew what she was seeing. That should have been my second big clue. Later, Patricia posted photos of our house in the neighborhood group, along with this condescending message: "Some new residents don't seem to appreciate the Maple Grove spirit. We hope they learn to respect our community." Dozens of comments poured in, neighbors I'd never met chiming in about property values and standards, treating us like some kind of virus. I was torn between outrage and humiliation. All this over roses. I suggested maybe we should smooth things over, apologize, try to make peace. Emily gave me a slow, icy smile that made my skin crawl. "Patricia should pray I keep quiet." There was something in her voice, steel wrapped in calm, that made me realize my wife wasn't afraid. She was choosing not to retaliate, yet. Emily responded in the group with this oddly polite but piercing reply: "Thank you, Mrs. Wellington, for your concern. Upon reviewing Maple Grove's policies, I've identified several clauses inconsistent with federal guidelines. Perhaps we should arrange a conversation about compliance." Suddenly, some neighbors got curious, started asking about those federal guidelines, and about Emily. Patricia quickly deleted the comment. Then posted again: "We don't need external specialists interfering with our community." That emphasis on our, like she thought she owned the whole place. I watched Emily read Patricia's reply, and something shifted in her expression, an unfamiliar look that flickered across her face. It was like watching someone who'd been holding back for too long, finally deciding they were done pretending to play nice with people who clearly didn't grasp the rules of the game. The next morning, I went to check the mail and caught 2 neighbors whispering near the mailbox. They were talking about the new people who apparently thought they were above the rules. As soon as they noticed me, the conversation stopped, but the damage had already been done. I could feel the social freeze creeping in around us, thick like concrete. It was clear they had made up their minds based solely on Patricia's version of events, never even bothering to say hello or learn anything real about us. Walking back to the house, I felt this rising sense of unease, like we were strangers in what was supposed to be our own community. Emily, on the other hand, seemed entirely unaffected by the growing tension. She pulled out her yellow notepad again and began jotting down what appeared to be detailed notes observations about Patricia's patterns, how the community was reacting, and something she referred to as escalation protocols. "One more move," she murmured, still scribbling. "Then I'll pull a lever they don't even know exists." The calm intensity in her voice made my stomach twist. It hit me then. I really didn't know what Emily was capable of when pushed. That moment should have been my third warning. My wife wasn't just smart. She was dangerous in a way I hadn't fully understood. And Patricia was about to discover what happens when you challenge someone who writes the rules instead of merely playing by them. Patricia, for her part, launched what can only be described as an all-out campaign of harassment, absurdly thorough and borderline unhinged. She was suddenly everywhere with her clipboard, decked out in color-coded tabs, patrolling our property line like a self-appointed aesthetic inspector. I'd glance outside and see her standing by the sidewalk, making careful notes about everything from the slant of our mailbox to the precise placement of our doormat. She even showed up with a measuring tape one afternoon to check if our flower bed crossed into what she claimed was communal land, which, according to our official property survey, it absolutely did not. I mean, who has the time or energy for that level of obsession? As Patricia's online campaign picked up steam, some neighbors started avoiding us. And to be honest, that hurt more than I expected. The woman next door stopped making eye contact when we passed, and the man across the street watched us like we were criminals plotting some suburban rebellion. Every trip to the mailbox started to feel like an exercise in paranoia, wondering who was watching and silently passing judgment. Meanwhile, Emily seemed completely unfazed. That should have been my second clue that something was off. I was spiraling from the stress while she treated the entire situation like distant background noise, not even worth her full attention. Then came the emails. Patricia sent out a string of dramatic neighborhood-wide messages accusing us of being uncooperative and threatening local property values with our rebellious disregard for community norms. She painted us as outsiders who had no respect for tradition. It was absurd after all. We'd only been living there for 8 weeks, and our biggest offense was planting roses that were apparently too bright. Each email escalated, portraying us as some existential threat to suburban stability. I couldn't wrap my head around how a flower color became symbolic of social collapse. But to Patricia, we were the beginning of the end for neighborhood order. And then things took a darker turn. Someone, clearly Patricia, sent an anonymous tip around the block, claiming I was running an illegal business from our garage. The letter warned of suspicious activities involving power tools, strange visitors picking up packages, and potential zoning violations that could spike insurance premiums for the entire street. Of course, my woodworking shop was fully permitted and above board, with everything filed properly through the city. But the letter was written to sound like I was operating some shady industrial setup threatening the whole community's safety. The fact that she would fabricate a lie that extreme to pick people against us made it clear just how far she was willing to go to stay in control. I walked into the kitchen and found Emily at the table, focused on her laptop. She was on a website labeled Federal Community Standards Board, scrolling through pages packed with legal jargon that went right over my head. "What are you working on?" I asked. "Research," she said flatly, eyes never leaving the screen. "I need a better understanding of how this neighborhood is structured." There was something about the way she said structured, like she was analyzing a business model, not a neighborhood led by an overzealous HOA president with too much time. Then her laptop pinged with a new message, an encrypted email marked urgent. Federal Oversight Inquiry. As Emily read it, her expression shifted subtly. Just for a second, the polished professional mask dropped, revealing something cold and quietly satisfied. "Mark," she said, not looking up, "can you give me a few minutes? This is work-related." I caught a glimpse of federal seals and case numbers before she tilted the screen away, but it was enough to send a chill through me. This was clearly bigger than neighborhood politics. My wife wasn't just someone casually interested in HOA management, she was operating on an entirely different level. She started making calls, serious calls, using phrases like federal compliance review and regulatory oversight. That's when I began to wonder if Emily had been living a double life all along. During one conversation, I heard her say, "I'm seeing patterns of systemic violations of federal housing codes. The financial discrepancies alone could lead to interstate charges." She was documenting everything Patricia had done with surgical precision, notes, files, timestamps like someone preparing evidence for a court case. Who are you talking to? I asked. Colleagues, specialists in community governance. She replied without missing a beat. At this point, I'd had enough. When I saw Patricia measuring our driveway again third time that week, I walked up to her, trying to keep it civil. Mrs. Wellington, I began politely, is there something you're looking for specifically? Maybe there's a way we can resolve this without all the measuring and paperwork. She looked up, her eyes sharp and cold, assessing me like a target rather than a neighbor. You'll regret assuming the law works the way you think it does, she said with a tight smile. Some people learn the hard way that community standards override individual whims, and believe me, you have no idea how much sway I really have. The final blow came when she organized what she called a neighborhood watch meeting to address disruptive residents threatening community harmony. She didn't name us outright, but everyone knew exactly who she meant when she described newcomers who ignored protocols and acted like federal laws trumped local rules. I felt humiliated knowing our neighbors were sitting around in someone's living room talking about us like a pest control problem. Like we were some infection that needed to be dealt with before our radical ideas about personal rights and rose bushes spread. Emily, meanwhile, finished her task with methodical care, saving files to what looked like a government encrypted server. Before closing her laptop, she glanced up at me with an expression I'd never seen, calculating, deliberate, like she was weighing choices I couldn't even comprehend. I was hoping they wouldn't push me to this, she said. Quiet but steady. But now I almost hope they do. There was something in her tone that made my hands tremble. I suddenly understood that Patricia had no clue what she had triggered, and neither did I, but I could feel it coming. The end of the calm phase, flashing. Blue lights lit up our walls like a twisted dance club. Two police cruisers idled outside, and my heart raced as Emily casually set down her coffee like it was just another Friday night. She'd skipped the second HOA meeting Patricia's prized event, and I thought the woman might spontaneously combust. She'd been ramping up for weeks, sending manic emails about mandatory attendance and civic duty, like missing a meeting was a federal offense. Then, right at 8 p.m., those cruisers rolled up with their lights spinning, as if we were running a black market operation in our garage. I seriously thought Emily might get arrested over roses. That's how absurd this had become. Peeking through the blinds, I saw Patricia pacing near the curb, clutching a binder so thick it looked like it might explode. She wasn't pointing fingers like usual, she was spinning in circles, clearly unraveling that binder. It held printed photos of every violation, a detailed timeline of our infractions, and cross-referenced data that looked like something out of a forensic investigation. She told the officers she'd warned everyone about us, that we'd violated every rule and were clearly hiding something dangerous. She slammed her finger on a photo like it was exhibit in a criminal trial. One officer, young, probably used to suburban drama, remained composed while Patricia ranted about order and property values. Mom, he said patiently, this is a civil issue, not a police matter, but the older officer seemed intrigued by something in her binder. His brow furrowed as he flipped through pages. Financial records mingled with flower photos. He exchanged a glance with his partner, something unspoken passing between them. Patricia turned beet red, now arguing with both cops like she was trying to convince them our rose garden was a matter of national security. Then Emily stepped outside like she owned the courtroom, heels sharp against the pavement, folder in hand as if it had been waiting for this very moment. Good evening, officers, she said with measured calm. May I explain the situation? She handed the younger officer a document. As he flipped through it, his expression shifted, eyebrows raised in recognition, flipping page after page like the contents had weight. These are my initial findings on Maple Grove's HOA, Emily said, her voice suddenly adopting a level of professionalism I'd never heard from her before. There are some serious financial discrepancies you should take a look at. Wait, what? Since when did my wife become the kind of person who investigates financial crimes? And why did she have documents that looked official enough to hand straight to law enforcement? It felt like I had stumbled into the middle of some carefully orchestrated operation. Patricia's jaw dropped as she locked eyes on Emily's folder. I could see her mentally scrambling, trying to figure out where Emily had gotten what clearly looked like official financial records on the HOA. Where did she get those? Patricia blurted, but neither officer even glanced her way. They were too focused on the papers Emily had handed over. The older cop's expression slowly morphed from mild interest to sharp concern as he scanned the pages. Then Emily spoke, and her tone held so much authority it silenced the entire driveway. I enforce the regulations. Patricia only pretends to understand. Right now, her HOA is in direct violation of federal statutes. Federal statutes. I stood frozen, hearing those words echo. Who was this woman? And what had she done with the gardening enthusiast I'd married? The woman who used to fuss over tomato vines and Sunday brunch menus. What is happening right now? I whispered to her. Emily kept her focus on the officers. Just watch, she said. This is how accountability works. Her voice was so calm, so measured, I realized that whatever was unfolding had been in motion for a long time, probably since the very day Patricia had shown up at our door with her smug invitation, still sounding like some kind of federal analyst. Emily continued, I oversee HOA operations across the country. What I'm seeing here raises serious compliance concerns at the federal level. Patricia stared at her like she'd just watched someone morph into a different person. To be honest, I felt exactly the same. My flower-obsessed wife had suddenly transformed into some kind of government investigator. The younger officer looked skeptical, clearly assuming this was just another neighborhood squabble. But his partner was locked in, analyzing Emily's paperwork like he recognized the real thing. I'm not just a neighbor, Emily said, giving a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She handed over another set of documents, and both officers leaned in even closer, their expressions growing serious. I watched the older cop's entire posture change. He suddenly understood. This wasn't some disgruntled homeowner. Emily had legitimate federal standing. She's been misusing HOA funds for personal gain, Emily explained. Patricia began trembling like someone in the early stages of shock. Landscaping paid for at her private residence, consultancy payments to her husband's firm, and a slew of other violations that directly breach federal HOA financial regulations. I stood there, stunned. My wife, the pancake-making, weekend gardening, plant-watering woman I knew, talking like a seasoned federal prosecutor, unraveling a case she'd apparently been building from the start. The older officer's frown deepened. As he flipped through the documents, his younger partner kept glancing between Emily and Patricia, clearly trying to figure out which story to believe. Ma'am, the senior officer said to Patricia, we're going to need to speak with you privately about these allegations. I suggest you contact legal counsel immediately. As they led Patricia toward the squad car, she turned back toward Emily with a mix of seething rage and raw fear, like she had just realized she had underestimated the wrong person. When the officer motioned for her to step aside, it hit me. Emily hadn't just won some neighborhood feud. She had launched an offensive. She stood calmly, watching Patricia go, like she had already anticipated whatever move might come next. And in that moment, I realized I didn't really know who I had married. That realization shook me. It was both electrifying and deeply unsettling. Because how do you respond when you discover your spouse might be some kind of covert federal operative, and the neighborhood busybody you'd written off as a nuisance? Turns out she's been committing crimes that your wife has been quietly documenting all along. Emily pushed open the door to her office, and it was like opening a vault to a parallel life. Diplomas, awards, and photos with people I'd only ever seen on the news filled the walls. A Georgetown law degree stared back at me. How had I never noticed that? And multiple commendations from the Department of Housing and Urban Development made my brain swirl. I stood there, overwhelmed. How did I live with someone for a decade and not realize they had a law degree from Georgetown? Was I blind, or had Emily hidden her entire professional identity from me? What is this certificate? I asked, pointing to a framed document that looked like it belonged in a federal building. Without saying a word, Emily opened a desk drawer and placed a federal ID on the table between us. Her eyes never left mine. You weren't supposed to. No, she said softly. Until now. My heart thundered in my chest as I picked up the badge. It read, Senior Federal Compliance Officer Emily Williams, authorized to investigate housing violations across all 50 states. Jesus, Emily, how the hell did I not know this? I choked out. Before she could reply, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face tightening. FBI Financial Crimes Division, she said. She gave me a quick, apologetic look. I have to take this. It's about Patricia. She hit speakerphone, and I tried to make sense of the surreal fact that my wife was getting real-time updates from federal agents. Emily, The link between Arizona and Florida is confirmed, said a voice on the line. You just handed us the missing piece. Warrants are being finalized now. Operations begin before dawn. Emily nodded, totally composed as if she were coordinating a federal sting rather than dealing with a petty HOA tyrant. Agent Martinez, please run a full background check on Patricia Wellington. I suspect she's embedded in more than one HOA. We're seeing recurring activity in other states. The agent confirmed it. A multi-state HOA fraud ring was already under investigation, and Emily's intel had cracked the case. She's been cycling through neighborhoods using the same scam, Emily explained. I stood there, feeling like I couldn't breathe. This goes far beyond our street. It's a national scheme. When HOA oversight fell apart, Congress asked for my help, she said, while I tried to absorb the truth. My wife, the woman I thought I knew, was apparently the architect behind the very rules these communities had to follow. I wrote the federal HOA compliance framework. When there's fraud, I step in, I investigate. And when necessary, I shut them down. How long have you been doing this? I asked, completely dazed. 12 years, she replied. Her voice was calm, but her words cut like steel. I've handled thousands of cases like Patricia's, and believe it or not, many are far worse. Some HOA boards steal millions. Some scam entire communities out of everything. Suddenly, memories flooded in, moments that should have raised flags. That urgent trip to Nevada where she came back ranting about procedural violations. Those late-night encrypted emails marked urgent. The official-looking logos I'd seen in passing but never questioned. It all made sense now. The cryptic phone calls about Colorado and Arizona. The vague references to enforcement actions. She hadn't been hiding mundane work. She'd been hunting fraudsters, building cases, and protecting homeowners, all while living in plain sight. Her phone rang again. She answered, and this time the voice on the line delivered a bombshell. Emily, we need your full dossier on Wellington. She's been running the same operation in at least 7 states over the past 5 years. Federal indictments are being filed as we speak. I watched, stunned, as my wife seamlessly coordinated with the FBI, discussing evidence and arrests like she'd done it 100 times before. Your documentation of financial fraud and intimidation gave us exactly what we needed, the agent added. We're connecting her to a broader network of corrupt HOA officials. I looked at her, this woman I thought I knew, and asked again, who are you? Emily slid her badge across the desk, her eyes fixed on mine, her expression unreadable, equal parts steel and sorrow. The one who makes sure people like Patricia never win, she said softly. That's who I've always been, Mark, even when I couldn't tell you. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a job she'd kept secret. This was a mission, a responsibility. She had been quietly protecting communities, ours included, from corruption and abuse. Emily ended the call, then turned to me with a look that was part relief, part dread. Mark, she said, her voice low, this isn't just about Patricia anymore. Things are going to escalate. There may be backlash before she's taken into custody. Are you ready for that? Her voice was steady as she explained the next steps, federal protocols, safety plans, but behind that calm, I saw something far more intense. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning of something much bigger. And my wife, she was right at the center of it. By the time Patricia's furious all-caps email blasted into every inbox in Maple Grove, the air practically crackled with tension. Whispers filled the sidewalks. People began taking sides before they even understood what battle they were joining. The subject line read, "Emergency community meeting tonight, mandatory. The future of our neighborhood is at stake." And inside the message, she'd painted Emily and me as dangerous infiltrators, hell-bent on tearing down everything the community had built. Patricia was rallying the neighborhood, claiming outsiders were meddling in their business. She seemed intent on turning residents into her personal army, backing one final, frantic bid to cling to her fading authority. Unbeknownst to her, Emily's FBI contact had already started digging into her financial activities, and it was likely that federal agents were tracking her every step as she laid out her endgame. She marched into that meeting like a commander rallying troops for a doomed battle, her voice shaking as she vowed to preserve tradition no matter the price. The atmosphere in the community center that evening was charged with an uneasy electricity. People spoke in murmurs, avoiding eye contact, as if something seismic was about to happen. Around 40 neighbors had squeezed into fold-up chairs, a few filming the proceedings on their phones like they instinctively knew they were witnessing something historic. Rumors had been circulating all day. FBI agents sighted at the coffee shop, black SUVs parked near the entrance to the development, and cryptic phone calls that had left Patricia visibly shaken. The gossip mill was in overdrive. Everyone could sense this wouldn't be your typical meeting about shrubs and pool cleaning schedules. Patricia had blasted out emails calling Emily a dangerous interloper trying to destroy the neighborhood's traditions through federal intimidation and bureaucratic force. She portrayed herself as a guardian of community independence, resisting government overstep. It might have been inspiring if she hadn't been embezzling funds and bullying residents who challenged her arbitrary mandates. In her own mind, she wasn't a corrupt official but some kind of grassroots hero, blind to the reality that she was simply a petty tyrant caught by someone who knew exactly where to look. She moved through the crowd with the anxious energy of someone who knew the ground was crumbling beneath her feet, making impassioned promises to defend their homes and values from federal agents supposedly out to regulate flower beds. 3 people already had Facebook Live running, sensing something explosive was on the verge of happening. Emily was there too, seated quietly in the back. As Patricia launched into her fiery speech about unity and pushing back against foreign influence, Emily sat perfectly still, composed, as if watching a rerun of a movie she'd already memorized. Meanwhile, Patricia whipped herself into a frenzy, shouting about threats to their way of life. The irony was hard to stomach. The very tactics she decried had been hers all along. She had been the one weaponizing fear and authority. Yet the crowd seemed enraptured, clinging to her words as though she were their only shield against a fictional invasion. Sitting beside Emily, I couldn't help but wonder, does Patricia realize she's describing herself? And do these neighbors understand they're watching their HOA president unravel before their eyes? Then, just as Patricia warned that government interference would dismantle everything they had built, Emily's phone rang loud enough for the entire room to hear. She let it ring twice before answering on speaker. Yes, Agent Brooks, I'm currently at the Maple Grove meeting. Every head in the room whipped toward her. The tension shifted instantly from guarded curiosity to stunned silence. Residents realized something monumental was about to unfold. She's not just a local issue, Emily told the caller as Patricia turned ghostly pale. We've connected her to a multi-state embezzlement scheme using identical tactics. Florida, Arizona, Nevada. Patricia began to visibly tremble. Same playbook, exploiting HOA roles to siphon funds and intimidate dissenters. Emily rose and slid a document across the table with calm precision, her gaze locked onto Patricia like a final, deliberate move in a chess match. Patricia Wellington, she said, standing with the calm authority that silenced the room. The FBI has issued warrants for your financial records from 2019 onward. At those words, 3 phones went live simultaneously. The moment Emily mentioned federal warrants, the story of Maple Grove exploded across local social feeds. Patricia's legs buckled. Panic swept the room. Her supporters started turning on her in real time, demanding answers about the community fund. Chaos erupted. The same residents who had defended her now realized they'd been backing someone who had been stealing from them for years. Patricia tried to fight back, shouting that it was all lies and government abuse. But her face betrayed her, a shifting storm of fear, anger, and desperation. She clutched her folder like it might save her and scanned the room for an escape route. She's been lying to us, someone yelled. Others jumped in, demanding explanations for financial discrepancies that had always seemed suspicious but were never proven until now. Patricia made a final plea, insisting she'd always had the neighborhood's best interests at heart. But no one was listening anymore. Emily's evidence was too specific, too credible. It wasn't just gossip anymore, it was federal. I watched her loyal supporters abandon her, one by one, and felt that strange satisfaction when justice shows up faster than you ever thought possible, especially when it brings agents and documentation. As residents surrounded Patricia with questions, Emily's phone buzzed again. She checked the screen, her face tightening with a look that made my stomach knot. That won't be the only arrest tonight, she whispered. Meanwhile, Patricia was trying to slip away, pushed along by a sea of furious neighbors now fully aware of the scale of the betrayal. Our phones buzzed again 2 days later, right in the produce aisle. Motion detected at the home office window. The snapshot made My blood run cold. Patricia, crowbar in hand, she'd snapped. Driven by desperation, she had come to our house while we were grocery shopping, likely hoping to find something incriminating or destroy documents tying her to the case. Unfortunately for her, Emily had anticipated something like this and installed a full security system. When you're dealing with a potentially dangerous HOA criminal, that's just basic protocol. Emily shifted into crisis mode, issuing real-time updates to the FBI while driving us back like a tactical response commander. When we arrived, flashing red and blue lights lit up the neighborhood. Patricia had been caught mid-break-in, attempting to pry open our office window. She screamed absurd excuses, checking for gas leaks, ensuring safety compliance as neighbors gathered, phones out, documenting everything. Someone actually yelled "World Star" as the police cuffed her. And that's when I realized we'd gone viral. The same woman who tried to control us over flower colors was now being led away in handcuffs. This time, no one doubted Emily had been protecting them from someone dangerous. Patricia was arrested on the spot. Attempted breaking and entering added to a long list of federal charges: fraud, embezzlement, fair housing violations. Officers treated the scene like an active federal case, photographing every surface Patricia had touched, while neighbors gave testimony about her increasingly erratic actions in recent weeks. Within an hour, our peaceful cul-de-sac had become a real-life crime scene. Later, as we cleaned up the mess Patricia made in our garden during the break-in, Emily's phone buzzed again. A new message, no name, just, "This isn't over." She read it, jaw clenched, then deleted it without a word. The chill lingered long after the sirens had faded. 6 months later, it felt like we'd lived an entire lifetime. Headlines flashed across. SCRENS HOA crackdown sweeps 7 states. Footage showed black SUVs in suburban streets. Patricia and 11 other officials being led away in cuffs. Then, there was Emily on our front porch, roses in full bloom behind her, speaking to reporters like some kind of avenging angel of suburbia. Patricia was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for embezzlement and attempted burglary. The investigation uncovered over $2 million stolen across multiple HOA accounts in 7 states. That day, our neighbor brought Emily flowers. A girl from down the street asked, "Is she famous?" They started calling it the Wellington Act. Emily never boasted, but I noticed her name on every page of that new legislation protecting millions of homeowners from corruption. Under new leadership, Maple Grove was unrecognizable in the best way. Our new HOA president, a kind retired teacher, often consulted with Emily, this time officially. The community felt like a real neighborhood again, where meetings solved problems instead of serving someone's ego trip. Patricia's old house was bought by a lovely family with 3 kids who lit up the street with laughter and sidewalk chalk. I sometimes catch them playing and wonder how different things might have been if Patricia had just let people live their lives. That evening, we sat on the porch, watching the sunset gild our roses. For once, Emily's smile wasn't mysterious, it radiated purpose. A quiet kind of strength that had never needed to shout to be powerful. Our garden thrived that spring, untouched by complaints or rules about petal shades. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who could dismantle any HOA in America just wanted to tend her plants and flip pancakes on Sundays without power-hungry interference. "Do you regret not telling me about your real job?" I asked as the golden light bathed our so-called illegal roses. Emily looked out at the horizon. "No," she said softly, "I was tired of hiding. And honestly, you handled it better than most people would after learning their spouse is a federal agent. We still live in Maple Grove, though now it feels like a place where people live instead of endure." The real takeaway here isn't about vengeance, it's about how justice sometimes arrives in ways you'd never expect, and how the quietest person on your street might be defending far more than their flower beds. Emily could have taken Patricia down at any time, but she gave her every chance to do the right thing and only acted when Patricia doubled down on corruption and cruelty. It turns out, the loudest bullies often fall the hardest. And sometimes, the person you love surprises you in the best way imaginable. Justice had come crashing through our neighborhood like thunder, exposing rot that had been festering for years. But peace came like a whisper, the soft hiss of sprinklers on rose petals. No one dared judge again. Sometimes, the people who seem like they have no power are holding all the cards. And honestly, that's what gives me hope. If this wild Ride kept you hooked? Drop a comment below or share your own crazy neighbor story. And hey, if you're feeling generous,